Welcome back. This is Chris. The date today is August 17th, year of our Savior, 2016. Bible study number 86. Yes, Bible study number 86. The title is, wait for it, Priestcraft-Monstrance. Priestcraft-Monstrance. M-O-N-S-T-R-A-N-C-E. Now we're almost done, folks. I applaud if you're still with me on priestcraft because there is a lot to it. We only have 2 chapters remaining, so hang in there. All right, so now we're getting into the consecration. That's the specific aspect here where the priest has the power to make holy. Consecration. Now, the priests are now adorned with the Eucharistic vestments from the goddess Vesta, with all appropriate rites, including vesting prayers, prayers which are spoken while the clerics put on vestments as part of the clergy. Remember, they're kissing the clothing, kissing themselves, saying their prayers as they put on the vestments. In the chancel area of the Christian temple is placed the credence table. That's in the chancel area. A credence table is a small side table in the sanctuary of a Christian church which is used in the celebration. The celebration means to perform a sacrament of the Eucharist. Latin credens or credentis, which means believer. That's where you get credence from. That's where you get credential. To credential. Okay? The credence table is usually placed near the wall of the epistle, on the epistle or south side of the sanctuary, and may be covered with a fine linen cloth. It is sometimes tended by an acolyte or altar server and contains on it the implements. Now, what is an acolyte? An acolyte is a member of the minor order. What is the minor order? All this can be verified in the English language, Collegiate Dictionary. The minor order is doorkeeper, lector, exorcist, yes, exorcist, and acolyte. That's the minor order versus the major order. Okay? And then you have contains on it the implements, which is an article serving to equip, which means tool, utensil, or instrument, that are used in the Eucharistic celebration. And celebration is what? To perform the Blessed Sacrament publicly with appropriate or prescribed rites, prescription, which may include the bread and wine prior to their consecration, which means to make sacred or declare sacred or to make inviolate or venerable by the celebrant priest. Then you have a bowl or an ewer, which is a vase-shaped pitcher or jug, and a towel for the lavabo and the ablutions. Now, what's a lavabo? A lavabo is a ceremony at Mass in which the celebrant washes his hands after offering oblations, and says Psalm 25, verses 6 through 12. And the ablutions is a prescribed washing of part or all of the body or of possessions such as clothing or ceremonial objects with the intent of purification or dedication. In liturgical churches, ablution can refer to purifying fingers or vessels related to the Eucharist after the Holy Communion, etc. So you have a lot going on here, folks. You have actually washing your hands, getting ready, consecrating yourself, because it starts on the credence or the credential table, we can call it that, and then it's getting ready for the transubstantiation ceremony. So that's where we're getting into a little bit more detail. We've covered this, but this is more detail. All right, so we see here that the wafers for the communion of the faithful may be stored in the ciborium or host box, sometimes erroneously referred to as a pyx, P-Y-X. Now, what is a ciborium? A ciborium is a goblet-shaped vessel for holding Eucharistic bread, also known as the baldachin, a freestanding vaulted canopy surrounded by 4 columns over a high altar. So those words are related, so they have multiple meanings. And then you have the host, which is Eucharistic bread. So we see that the wine and water for the chalice will be in cruets, which is a vessel for wine or water for altar service. The chalice and paten, a paten is what? Or a paten is a circular plate of precious metal for the Eucharistic bread, covered with a cloth and veil, may be placed on the credence from the beginning of the service until the offertory, at which time they are moved to the altar. Okay. Now the credence is what? Credence, what does credence mean? Well, credence means credentials. Mental acceptance, belief, trust, a small table where the bread and wine rest before consecration. Right there in your collegiate dictionary. Now it's getting ready for the offertory. Now what is the offertory? The offertory is the Eucharistic offering of bread and wine to God before they are consecrated at communion. The presentation of the offerings of the congregation at public worship. So until the offering, at which time they are moved to the altar. So we're still at the credence table right now. Now, we see that in the traditional Roman Catholic Mass, the chalice and paten, or paten, covered with their cloths, are placed on the credence, or credence table, from the beginning of the service until the offertory. During the offertory, the subdeacon, deacon, or priest places the sacred vessels on the altar. The wine and water are taken in their cruets to the altar to be poured into the chalice. After the altar has been incensed, it is, if it is a high mass, you have two servers. Now, high mass is what? Mass is a sequence of prayers and ceremonies forming the celebration of the Eucharist. Then you have two servers wash the priest's hands. Now, what is a server? One that serves food or drink, or the celebrant's assistant at Mass. Right there out of your collegiate dictionary. Now the two servers wash the priest's hands. The priest will hold his hands over the lavabo bowl, and the first server, if there are two, will pour water over the priest's hands. The second server then hands the priest the lavabo towel for him to dry his fingers. During the washing, the priest says the words of Psalm 25, 6 through 12. When a bishop is serving, a larger and more ornate basin and ewer are used to wash his hands. In the Eucharist of the Anglican Communion, the ritual regarding the use of the credence table varies from parish to parish and diocese to diocese. In some parishes, typically those identifying as Anglo-Catholic. Now, what is Anglo-Catholic? Anglo-Catholic is relating to a high church movement in Anglicanism, emphasizing its continuity with historic Roman Catholicism and fostering Catholic dogmatic and liturgical rituals and traditions. That is what Anglo-Catholic is. Anglo-Catholic is linked to high church, and high church is sacerdotal. All right, so we see that typically of the Anglo-Catholic, this ritual is quite elaborate with an army of servers, which is the celebrant's assistant at Mass, a subdeacon and deacon all taking part. In other parishes, the chalice and paten may already be on the altar from the beginning of the service. Normally, the server will bring the wine and water and wafers to the priest at the offertory and then wash his or her hands. And that's taken from your online dictionary under credence table, Wikipedia. All right, so once the non-consecrated Eucharistic elements, specifically the bread and wine, are transferred from the credence table to the altar, a very special incantation is applied by the celebrant or the priest officiating at the Eucharist. Now, what is an incantation? An incantation is a use of spells or verbal charms spoken or sung as part of a ritual of magic. A formula of words chanted or recited in or as if in such a ritual. Now you see, is applied by the celebrant to transform or change the elements of the bread and wine. So we see that a very special act of consecration is that of the bread and wine used in the Eucharist, which according to Roman Catholic belief involves their change into the body and blood of Christ, a change referred to as transubstantiation. Transubstantiation is defined as what? The change in the Eucharistic elements at their consecration in the Mass from the substance of bread and wine to the substance of the body and blood of Christ, with only the accidents as taste, color, shape, and smell of the bread and wine. To consecrate, which means to make or declare sacred by the priest, the bread and wine, the priest speaks the words of institution, also known as the words of consecration. Now, the words of institution, also called the words of consecration, are words echoing those of Jesus himself at his Last Supper, that when consecrating bread and wine, Christian Eucharistic liturgies include in a narrative of that event. Eucharistic scholars sometimes refer to them simply as the verba, Latin for words. Almost all existing ancient Christian churches explicitly include the words of institution in their Eucharistic celebrations and consider them necessary for the validity of the sacrament, which is Blessed Sacrament, a formal religious act that is sacred. This is a practice of the Latin or Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and all the churches of Oriental Orthodoxy, including the Armenian, the Coptic, the Ethiopian, and the Malankara. The words of institution of the Roman Rite Mass are here presented in the official English translation of the Roman Missal and the form given in the following italicized text. Now, what is the Roman Missal? It's the liturgical book that contains the text and rubrics for the celebration of the Mass in the Roman Rite of the Catholic Church. So the distinction here made by bolding is not found in the Roman Missal. So when we're talking about what's bold, which is this is my body, this is my blood, is removed from the Roman Missal, which is kind of curious. So this is what they quote. Take this, all of you, and eat of this, for this is my body, which will be given up for you. Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me. So we see that the theological opinion about the necessity and sufficiency of pronouncing certain parts of the words of institution, the 8 words bolded in the English translation given above, is not included in, for instance, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, abbreviated CCC, published in the definitive form in 1997. So they remove, this is my body, this is my blood. Interesting. The following version of the words of institution is found in the Book of Common Prayer, Latin communis, meaning public, and prayer is a number of related prayer books used in the Anglican Communion, and is used among those in the Anglican Communion, which is an international association of independent churches consisting of the Church of England and of national and regional Anglican churches in full communion with it. Quote, for in the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take, eat, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance, which means remember or memorial. Well, that's nothing wrong with that. That's why you do it, as a memorial of me. Likewise, after supper, he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink ye all of this, for this is the blood of the New Testament, which is shed, which means to cause blood to flow by wounding or cutting, for you and for many, for the remission, which means to remit, to release from guilt or penalty of sins. Do this as oft as ye shall drink of it in remembrance of me. And that's taken from the Holy Eucharist, Rite 1, the online Book of Common Prayer. So, obviously it's talking about shedding of Christ's blood, which he did not do at the Last Supper, but he shed his blood on Golgotha, the place of the skull. Now we see here that in the Catholic tradition at the moment of consecration, which means to make or declare sacred, the elements called gifts, which means to endow with some power, quality, or attribute for liturgical purposes, are transformed, literally transubstantiated into the body and blood of Christ. Catholic doctrine holds that the elements, bread and wine, are not only spiritually transformed, but are substantially transformed but are substantially transformed into the body and blood of Christ. Although the elements retain the appearance or accidents of bread and wine, they become the body and blood of Christ. The presence of Jesus in the Eucharist is known as the doctrine of the real presence within the Roman Catholic tradition. Other Christians, notably Anglicans, Old Catholics, Marthoma, and Lutherans, accept the doctrine of the real presence whilst rejecting transubstantiation as a philosophical concept. Owing to these beliefs, the consecrated elements are given the same adoration, which means to adore, to worship as a deity or as a divine devotion, and devotion that Christians of these traditions accord to Christ himself. So they're basically following the pattern, but they're kind of watering it down a little bit. They might say, well, we don't believe in transubstantiation, we believe in con-transubstantiation. You know, it's not the actual body and blood of Christ, but it's the Jesus is around it. Well, you're still conjuring up Jesus, okay? So you believe. Now, within churches of these traditions, the reserved sacrament serves as a focal point of religious devotion, which is worship. And many of them, during Eucharistic adoration, which is worship as a deity, the celebrant or officiating priest displays the sacrament or blessed sacrament in the monstrance. Yes, the monstrance, which is a vessel in which the consecrated host is exposed for the adoration or worship of the faithful. And the faithful is what? A church member in full communion and good standing, typically on the altar, a usually enclosed table used in consecrating the Eucharistic elements or as a center of worship or ritual. When not being displayed, the reserved sacrament is locked in a tabernacle, which is a receptacle for consecrated elements of the Eucharist, more common in Roman Catholicism, or an aumbry. Now, an aumbry is a recessed cabinet in the wall of a Christian church for storing sacred vessels and vestments. Items kept in an aumbry include chalices or other vessels, as well as items for the reserved sacrament, the consecrated elements from the Eucharist. Now, this is more common in the other traditions mentioned. So it's quite involved. In the service of benediction, the priest blesses the people with the Eucharist displayed in the monstrance. Now, what's the benediction? The benediction is the invocation of a blessing, especially the short blessing with which public worship is concluded. A Roman Catholic or Anglo-Catholic, which is high church devotion, including the exposition of the Eucharistic host in the monstrance and the blessing of the people with it. The priest blesses the people with the Eucharist displayed in the monstrance. Now, a monstrance, once again, is a vessel in which the consecrated host is exposed for the adoration or worship of the faithful or church members' communicants. This blessing differs from the priest's blessing as it is seen to be the blessing of Christ rather than that of the individual priest. The exposition of the monstrance during the benediction is traditionally accompanied by chanting or singing of the hymn Tantum Ergo. So once it's transferred from the credentials table, the credence table, to the altar, right? And then it's transformed into the actual body and blood of Jesus Christ. So they take the big disc wafer representing the sun and they put it into a monstrance, which is also called a sunburst. Yes, a sunburst. And then you have a humeral veil, and then you're holding this on a pole, and you raise it up, and what does everybody do? They kneel before this idolatrous thing, believing it is Jesus Christ. That's why you have the altar rail. That's why you kneel before your God as you partake in eating of Jesus Christ as a victim, as the host. Okay, now a little bit more detail on monstrances, okay? Monstrances are usually elaborate in design. Most are carried by the priest. Others may be much larger, fixed constructions, typically for displaying the host, which is Latin for sacrifice or Eucharist, and a special side chapel, often called the Chapel of the Blessed Sacrament. For portable designs, the preferred form is a sunburst. I don't make this stuff up, folks, and that's taken from Instructio Clement V, on a stand usually topped by a cross. Medieval monstrances were more varied in form than contemporary ones. Those used for relics, which means remains of a martyr or saint, and occasionally for the host, the Eucharistic bread, typically had a crystal cylinder in a golden stem, and those usually used for host had a crystal window and a flat-faced golden construction which could stand on its base. The monstrance was often made of silver, gilt, or other precious metal and highly decorated. Look it up in your collegiate dictionary. That's taken from Monstrance. Look up these pictures. It's a sunburst, okay? It's fascinating. And that's where they put Jesus, apparently as transubstantiated as a host. They put him as representing the sun. They put him in this monstrance or sunburst. Look it up, folks. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Sunburst. All right, we're going to get into the collegiate dictionary at page 881. Now, number one, a flash of light, especially though through a break in clouds. Number two, a jeweled brooch, which is an ornamental fastening device, usually with a clasp, representing a sun surrounded by rays. That's what it is. Remember, all this stuff is about sun worship. When you realize that, it's all about sun worship. Now, we see that in the center of the sunburst, which is a flash of light, especially through the clouds, or a jeweled brooch, an ornamental fastening device, usually with a clasp, representing a sun surrounded by rays. The sunburst, the monstrance, normally has a small round glass the size of a host through which the Blessed Sacrament can be seen. Behind this glass is a round container made of glass and gilded metal called a luna, which holds the host. What's a luna? A luna is silver used in alchemy, which is a power process of transforming something common into something precious. Yes, that is sorcery. Taking something normal, ordinary, and turning it into something extraordinary. Okay, now this holds the host. Now, the host is the immolated, which means to kill or destroy as a victim sacrifice. This holds securely in place. When not in the monstrance, the host in its luna is placed in a special standing container called a standing pyx, P-Y-X. Now, in the tabernacle, now that's a container for the reserved host, especially a usually watch-shaped case usually used to carry the Eucharist to the sick. Now, the tabernacle, remember the tabernacle is what? A tabernacle is a receptacle for the consecrated elements of the Eucharist, especially an ornamental locked box fixed to the middle of the altar and used for reserving the host. Before the current design, earlier little shrines or reliquaries of various shapes and sizes were used. So you used different little shrines or reliquaries. Remember, reliquaries are what? They're relics, relique, which means a container for religious relics, remains of a martyr. That's where they hold dead body parts of a saint. Okay? Bones with probably some sinews and tissue attached. Now, when the monstrance contains the host, the priest will not touch the vessel because now it is sacred. So, will not touch the vessel with his bare hands. Out of respect, he holds with it a humeral veil, and a humeral is referring to your shoulders. So they put a humeral veil, and he's holding this, but he can't touch the monstrance or sunburst. Now, a humeral veil is one of the liturgical vestments of the Roman Rite. It consists of a piece of cloth about 2.75 meters long and 90 centimeters wide, draped over the shoulders and down the front, normally of silk or cloth of gold. At ends, there are sometimes pockets in the back for hands to go into so that the wearer can hold items without touching them with the hands, because you can't touch it. Can't touch this, okay? A wide band of cloth that covers the shoulders, a humera, and has pleats on the inside in which he places his hands. That's taken from Monstrance, online encyclopedia. Now we see that the Catholic Church understands the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, as that's one of the reasons why the chancel area is sacred. So they believe. Now, The Catholic Church understands the presence of Christ in the Eucharist as the real body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ is coming about through a supernatural act that changes the substance of the bread and wine into the substance of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ without changing the appearances, the color, shape, or accidental properties of the bread and wine, a change referred to as transubstantiation. And remember, accidental is referring to accident, which you can verify this in your college dictionary, as used in philosophy, is an attribute which may or may not belong to a subject without affecting its essence. And that's taken from your online encyclopedia, Real Presence of Christ in the Eucharist. All right, good pictures here of the sunburst or monstrance. We see the Blessed Sacrament in a monstrance carried in a procession by Cardinal Daniels wearing a humeral veil. Now we see that Aristotle, a Greek philosopher and scientist born in the city of Stagira, Chalcidice, on the northern periphery of classical Greece, 384 to 320 BC, made a distinction between the essential and the accidental properties of a thing. Catholic theologians such as Thomas Aquinas and have employed the Aristotelian concepts of substance and accident in articulating the theology of the Eucharist, particularly the transubstantiation of the bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus. According to this tradition, the accidents, the taste, color, shape, and smell of the bread and wine remain the same. The appearance of the bread and wine do not change, but the substance changes from bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. Accidental philosophy. So once again, Roman Catholicism borrows this from Aristotle. It borrows this from the Greco-Roman paganism. That's what Roman Catholicism is borrowing from, and they can't explain this, so they come up with philosophy. Now, God warns against vain and deceitful philosophy. Do not be deceived by the traditions of men, by the philosophy. God bless you. We'll pick it up next time. Stay tuned for more Priestcraft. God bless you. Thank you.